Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast which explores the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this our fourth season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from theethicalpanda.com.
And I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
Today we're talking about minute 110, which begins with the credits for the production assistants, who are Daniel Baxter, Federico Ferrari, Matthew Fortino, Matt Hall, David Cole, Teresa Jolene Lee, Olivia McCollum, Jesse Ozeri, Teresa Prindle, Trevor Tavares, Spencer Taylor, Ali Tycast, Amy Vanghaus, and Aaron Walker, and ends with Greensman, First Unit Standby Foreman, Jeffrey Thomas in the New Mexico unit. Joining us on the show today, as has been every day this week, we have Paul Hoppe, a.k.a. ZenMadman, a poker professional, a writer, a musician, a martial artist, and a frequent guest of mine, and occasionally a official or unofficial co-host on the Superhero Ethics and Star Wars Universe podcasts. Paul, are you feeling like you never want to die? Are Foo Fighters inspiring you after been listening to it this intently for this long?
I always feel like I never want to die. I can't say that's inspired by the Foo Fighters. The song is still going on. So if anything was going to change my mind on that.
Yeah. The more serious question I want to ask is, I like what you said about how Thor... that this movie kind of like was what made you kind of first buy into the MCU. And I'll admit, like, you got me into the MCU. Like, I watched the Iron Man movie. I had no interest in Captain America or Thor. I watched Avengers and liked it, but after talking with you a lot, especially when you were getting very excited for Civil War, it was what kind of got me to go back and watch a lot of these things. Where do you kind of go with that? Like, I mean, you and I have done a whole podcast on how you feel about the MCU now, but just especially in terms of like starting with where you saw this, how much do you think like, you know, Thor's journey in the MCU has kind of paid off and have you kept appreciating it the way you appreciated it in this movie?
So after this movie, I watched Avengers like 5 times in Costa Rica before it came out in the United States. I didn't go to Costa Rica to see the movie. That was just a nice side benefit. I was there to play poker.
That's what
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to go to Costa Rica and see this before it comes out in the U.S.
I mean, there's folks who do that now. Like, that's definitely a kind of tourism thing that happens.
That's commitment. That's a thing, I guess. I mean, Costa Rica's lovely, so like just go there to go there. But yeah, I liked how they brought Loki back for that movie. I thought he made a very compelling villain in the Avengers. I think it was very smart to have like one focal villain and then just kind of a faceless army when you have like 6 main heroes and then some other important characters on the protagonist side. And then Thor's journey, Dark World. I actually originally liked Dark World more than most people did, I think. Ragnarok, actually, by the time we got to Ragnarok, I was kind of like a little bit sort of over the MCU. Like, I wasn't really excited for movies. But then I saw Homecoming and I was like, oh, this is great. And then I saw Ragnarok and I was like, oh, this is great. And then I saw Infinity War and I was like, why did you just undo everything that happened in Ragnarok? Anyway, but overall, yeah, I do think Thor's journey is really, really compelling. I think he has a big arc, and that's one of the things that I think the MCU has done so well is with some of its central characters, it's just really given them very large, very strong arcs that you would see in, a 10-season television show. They've been in 7, 8, 9, 10 movies maybe each. And I said in the last episode that my favorite Thor moment was, when he says, I went for the head. And that's sort of the end of that arc. And that kind of completes this whole sort of learning that you just can't solve everything with violence. But then I really enjoyed Endgame Thor too, after that point. I thought that was a really interesting turn.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who, like, I have not had the realizations that he has had, but emotional eating is definitely a big part of my world and have wrestled a lot with the kind of the self-worth questions that come up about that. Yeah, seeing, like, Thor gain weight and Thor become like kind of like slovenly and like not taking care of himself and kind of punishing himself. Because as you said, it's this huge realization. So often in movies, that realization happens and it's like, okay, he learned it, move on. But the fact that the whole next movie is him dealing with that and all like he doesn't know who he is anymore and it's just wrecked his world. And where he comes to of like he is worthy without having to lose the weight, without having to like become the ideal like bodybuilder Thor he used to be. It is often, I think, with writers when they end a character arc, they just either stretch the arc out forever or they just write the character out because they're done. And for Thor to be able to have a second arc that took place is pretty rare. And it makes me just really excited for Thor Love and Thunder. And especially because of all this movie, like we've been talking so much about getting Jane back and Jane having a much bigger role because she becomes Thor in that movie. So yeah, there's a good stuff there.
Yeah, that's, I think, why origin stories are so popular in the superhero world and why it's so hard to make the second movie. Because it's like, well, they've already gone through their arc and now they're just a hero. So what do we do? And a lot of times those second films, it's just like, and even Thor: The Dark World, it's like they didn't have as much with him. It was, it was something that they were able to find ways to explore through different elements. And but it took a lot of work, I think, for them to kind of get there and figure out how to do it.
And I just want to say, because as Paul said, we've been watching those again, if you want to see a completely different take on that problem, the Tim Burton, Michael Keaton Batman movies are kind of fascinating because the first one isn't an origin story. Like, it kind of teases that it might be and you get some flashbacks, but it's not the Batman origin story. And then the second, as you're saying, Andy, they often don't know what to do with the second movie. Tim Burton's idea is just take Batman off screen. Like, he does. He's in maybe like 20% of the movie. It's kind of a fascinating thing that they do. So
yeah,
anyway,
right.
The intro's gone on very long, but because I don't think we're going to have too much to talk about in the main part, but let's have a quick promo.
We love doing this show and talking about all the stuff about Thor, but it does take time and cost money. We would love it if you would consider becoming a member of the show. Members are like patrons over on Patreon. It's all kind of the same thing. We're using Patreon's memberful platform. Just go to truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute. You can find out what we offer to our patrons. It's only $5 a month, or you can get a discount if you join at the annual rate. Thanks.
All right, so welcome back. And now we're kind of into the world of the assistants. As I said, I started off by reading all the different production assistants. We're getting a number of other assistants as things go. Is that just a kind of catch-all, like you've got the production designer and then just everyone who is helping them is an assistant? Or is that like, are those specific roles in a specific way?
A production assistant is usually where you come in the industry. You start at the bottom and you're a production assistant, a PA, working with whichever department. It's just a very broad area. I mean, different departments might have their own production assistants, but largely it's just the grunts who are there kind of helping with whatever needs help with, whether it's, cleaning up after a meal or helping one of the departments move some things, or just being ready with somebody's coffee so that they're ready to grab it when they walk by. It's all over the map as far as what they do.
Yeah, our friend Logan was a PA on You've Got Mail. And I remember his job basically consisted of like, go get Meg Ryan sushi. No, not that sushi, this sushi. Like, the coffee has to be this temperature. But also, like, when you're on location, like, tell people, oh, you can't cross this street yet. Can you wait? Okay, now you can go. And like on a headset. And it's like, it feels like the intern of the film industry, basically. I mean, you get paid, but, it's kind of the bottom of the...
Well, and part of what's fascinating to me, and Andy, you noted a number of these names, and we'll talk about them, but, you think of that position like oh, yeah, you'll start in the mailroom and you'll work your way up to a corporate executive as like the corporate America story. That 9 times out of 10, I think we kind of roll our eyes like, come on, you're never going to like make that journey. You're just going to be stuck in the mailroom forever. and we're looking at a number of these people you called out who were not even like production assistants. They were like assistants to specific people. And now they're executive producing or they're doing other kind of big things. Is that journey a lot more common than you might think originally?
Well, I mean, and, I should just clarify within my notes, like, yeah, there's a very big kind of division between like the production assistants, who are the people who are helping the production as a whole, and like the people who are more the personal assistants to some of these producers and things. Because their journey is like, I want to be a producer, usually like that's, or I want to be a director or whatever it is. And they are working as the assistant for that particular person so that they can kind of help that person with whatever they need, but also it's a good stepping stone, because if they can continue proving themselves as being very effective and great at their jobs, then that producer at some point is going to say, you know what, you've been so helpful, this business, I'm going to bring you on as an associate producer on the next film or something like that. And like Trin Tran, I mean, she was assisting Louis Despacito in this film, and I mean, you look at her credits now, I mean, she's executive producing some of these big Marvel films, and so she's definitely somebody who kind of took that journey. And I mean, it's great. It's great to see that she's done that. But you'll definitely start seeing her name now in line with all the other producers, not just as an assistant. And I think a lot of these people who I called out, I mean, in this section, it's all the different, like Kevin Feige's producer, just a bunch of the different producers, Kenneth Branagh's assistant. They are now all doing a lot of this sort of work. Some of them stayed in Marvel, some of them have moved out of Marvel, but largely they have kind of continued doing that sort of stuff.
That makes sense. I think when I hear the word personal assistant, I think personal assistant to an actor, which there the stereotype is much more like, as you were kind of saying, like get the coffee hot, but not too hot, and get the right kind of sushi and that kind of stuff. But imagine you're assisting to, I mean, not that like, I don't want to play into the stereotype that actors all are like crazy with ego and that the backstage people are totally fine. But I'm sure there's just as many directors who've had personal assistants doing absolutely nutty, if not like illegal or whatever things. Me Too is in Hollywood just as much as anywhere else. But it is nice to hear the stories that actually it can kind of work out that way.
Yeah, and I think like assistants to a producer or something is a little bit more of an apprenticeship type role, right? Whereas assistant to an actor is like, you're not going to become an actor by being an assistant to an actor. But although at the same time, like I do think Hollywood works a lot through connections as much as resume, and like, you need to have the skills, but like meeting people and talking to people, a lot of it is, I think, person to person. It's not like on Indeed.com or whatever. Like
one thing I think you pulled out, Andy, was Grit Menziner is the assistant to Ms. Portman, which, by the way, it's also interesting that like they're Natalie Portman up above, but now it's Mr. Feige and Ms. Portman. But this was actually the fifth movie that Grit had been the personal assistant to Natalie Portman. So I guess, definitely if you develop a good rapport, like this person knows how I like my coffee, like that, you're going to keep going with them.
Well, and a lot of the ones like the personal assistants for the actors, like Chris Hemsworth, worked with him from 2011 to 2015. Grit Menzer worked with Natalie Portman for 5 films. Jennifer Franklin worked with Anthony Hopkins for 10 years. So, I mean, if they find that right person who they click with, they very likely will kind of continue working with them because they always do. They always get it right. They're always there for me. And I think that's a big part of the role.
Yeah. I mentioned it briefly, but I just want to give a shout out. I'm sure that is wildly inaccurate and satire, but if you want to see a lot of stories that are having fun about like kind of the backstage nonsense that happens with production assistants and all that, the TV show Entourage, because that's about like, especially with characters where like the actor is just wanting to get his best friend a job. And so like, you're my production assistant or whatever it is. You're my personal assistant. I mentioned a couple of them, but Andy, were there other specific people you wanted to call out? I think we absolutely have to shout out Duffy Gaver, the personal trainer for Chris Hemsworth.
Yes.
Because I mean, if there's anybody who could have created a more perfect specimen for a male body playing Thor in a film, I think Duffy had was able to pull it off, because I mean, Chris completely fits, and I think everybody was completely happy with the work that Duffy did here.
And I think it's such an interesting person to think about, because like when you first see that, I think before I really knew anything, my first thought was like, look, Chris Hemsworth was not a schlub when he auditioned for this movie. Like, how much of that is a personal trainer versus how much is just Chris Hemsworth has been hitting a gym for 2 hours a day for the last 20 years of his life. But then, especially around Eternals, some of the actors talked about this a lot. Looking like you do in some of these movies, like the very muscles bulging, like that's not just a very well-built person. That's someone who was like done a very particular exercise regimen at a very specific, like 6 hours before the shot, and then like not had any water for a specific amount of time. Like there's very specific physical things you have to do to your body, often not very healthy. But yeah, certainly like, and I'm sure the physical trainer, I don't want to blame the personal trainers for the bad parts of that, but like just to say like there's an awful lot of work that goes into like getting the body exactly right for that one shot. Cause that's not just Chris Hemsworth. Like, if you look at his most muscular shot, he did not look like that from day one to the ending day of the filming by any means.
Absolutely. And he probably had some weights just off set. And so like right before they called action, he was over there, putting in a few extra reps just to kind of give it even, just that slightly more the bigger, more sweaty sort of look, just enough to kind of that extra glint.
I think swole is the word that comes to mind. To get the blood to the muscles, literally, right? So that there actually is. Yeah. I do think like it would be like, the more heavyset Thor isn't necessarily like the only visual that you could have of a Thor who's not depressed, right? Like, I think the more heavyset Thor could as easily be like the strongest people in the world generally are like they are built differently than, Chris Hemsworth in this film. I do think they went for something very specific and it seemed very convincing, and they very clearly were like, this is what we want Thor to look like. And they're like, you can't really make him look more like that than he does. Like,
yeah. We joked before about how it was, there's a couple scenes where he has his shirt off, and there's a lot of good reasons for it. But I'm sure part of it's also the actor being like, look, I worked this hard. I'm starving myself. Let people look at my damn pectoral muscles,
right. The opposite of exactly. Kumail Nanjiani.
I feel so bad for him. And he's the one who I think who made the most biggest deal about, like, he did this whole interview about, like, look, don't go to the gym trying to look like me. This is all special effects and me starving myself and these terrible things to get this ridiculous body that I'm going to lose. And then he never takes his shirt off in the movie. Anyway, I feel so, he's one of my favorite actors right now. He's so good. And I just feel bad for him for that. Paul, what about for you? Any kind of either particular people or particular roles that stood out for you in these minutes?
Yeah. So first of all, there's transportation, right? Which I think is mostly like the Teamsters Union, which my understanding is that it was kind of one of the last unions to still be as some of the stereotypes about unions as it was. I might have heard some stories from my parents about things that happened to people who didn't do things the way the Teamsters wanted them to. But then actually, you know what? I'm going to, not even a story, but just like when I was working at Manhattan Center and the Teamsters would back these 40-foot long semis or however long they are, ridiculously long trucks on a Manhattan street and then turn it into this narrow parking space in a building in Manhattan. It is absurd the level of skill that must be necessary to actually manage these trucks somewhere like New York City, at least. In LA, maybe it's not as difficult. I don't know. But like in New York, it's ridiculous actually trying to get anywhere with vehicles that large and the amount of stuff that has to be carried back and forth all the time. So, I think people are like, oh, they're just driving. But it's like, it's actually really difficult, I think.
Yeah, I think they get a lot of grief because, and I've given them grief because a lot of times, like the drivers, like their job is to drive, but once they're on set, they don't do anything.
Right.
They just sit around and then they complain that, lunch is 10 minutes late and they ding you for it. But it's just like, come on, just go with the flow. But they won't. They're very specific. And if something, if there's trash, they won't pick it up. It's not my job.
Right.
It's very much kind of the stereotyping of who the transpo kind of the drivers are, but they, as you said, they are incredible at their jobs and they keep all the vehicles running. They're doing all the maintenance and everything through the whole months and months of time. And so, they definitely aren't slacking.
That kind of leads me to my next question, which is very union connected. And I think anyone who's listened to me and Andy or certainly Paul on other things knows that that is we're talking about a specific union that had a lot of problems at a specific point in time. And I'm sure even today, some, the rules can be frustrating, but like we're all pretty solidly pro-union here, to be clear. But, with the credits, I've always kind of wondered, and I wonder if this is kind of union negotiations, like, you see, like we talked about, like there was all the effects people, and then all the lighting people, and then the accountants, and then all the costume people. Like, and I've never really paid attention, but like, is the order that those things go in, is that the same for every movie? And is that due to like union negotiation type stuff? Is it just the producer being like, yeah, let's do the storyboard people next, and then we'll do the costumes? Or what decides like this order that you get all the credits in?
There's a lot of it is just guesswork and trying to block. Well, okay, let's make sure all the camera people are together, and they work a lot with the grip and electric. So we'll do all the grips next, then we'll do all the electric. I have never found it necessarily the same from film to film. I think that certainly you're trying to block certain people, certain groups together because it makes more sense, and generally you're doing all the production stuff, like pre-production and production, and then at the very end you have all the post-production with all the editing, the music, supervision, the visual effects, like toward the end of the credits. So it's kind of like following the process of the film, and I think there's something to that, but yeah, sometimes I'm always still surprised when I'm going like, why is that like that key person, like the head of the makeup department, so far buried in the process as opposed to having a bigger role? But I think I don't know of any union rules as far as like specific orders for the credits. But I could be wrong. But I think a lot of it is just trying to figure it out based on kind of like the flow of a production.
I really hope this doesn't happen, but the 100-year history of Hollywood, I imagine there'd be like these couple of times where it's like, yeah, the makeup artist pisses off the producer or something like that. It's like, all right, we're going to bury him in the credits,
Yeah, I don't know if there's any, like, to what extent there's a specific order. Obviously, the cast is generally up top, and then the songs, and then, like, the union seals at the end, like you see the IA seal at the bottom. Like, that's, and then there's everything else in the middle. But I do know it's a big deal to a lot of people, and people have sometimes been very upset about exactly their placement in the credits.
Well, it's like you said, especially, your work's not recognized by the Oscars. It's not often people talk about, like, this is the place that your work is recognized, that it's going to be very important. It's the only one. And I do wonder if that has changed with, back in the day, like you went to a movie, you saw the credits, and then if you wanted to kind of like try to remember who did the makeup, like unless you were like, it would be pretty difficult to track that down. Like it wasn't like today where you can just open up IMDb and see all the credits. And so I imagine also that like we think about now that there's all these other ways to find the credits, but remembering that a lot of this culture started long before that when, yeah, an average person seeing it on the screen is the only time they're ever going to see that. So,
and that's like, I mean, there are a lot more credits now than there used to be, but the number of people working on films hasn't changed that drastically. You still need all those different roles. It's just they have slowly, more and more people and departments and unions have fought for, our department should be credited as well. And so that's why credits seem so long now, as opposed to the olden days where it's just like, it pretty much was like just what we would see in the kind of the top credits. Like that was all we would get. Yeah. Here, we're just getting so much more now.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Any other names or titles that jumped out? I think, Paul, you want to talk about the second unit somewhat?
Yeah, exactly. That's, my dad was a cameraman. He wasn't really a director of photography much. I mean, not on any features. He did some commercials. But second unit is often where, like, if you are a camera operator, you can kind of sort of move up by not becoming the main DP, but by, directing things in the second unit. And I mean, if you look at these credits, there's all the the initial credits, and then you can see how massive the whole second unit is. And then there's also a New Mexico unit. And so they're not necessarily taking the entire crew around everywhere. And sometimes you'll have a specific director for the second unit, and sometimes maybe I guess what makes it the second unit is that the main director isn't going there, right? But so, here maybe a lot of it's stunts, but often it'll be like location shots. It'll be like, capturing just that one perfect sunset shot. That's just like an establishing shot. And, the second unit will go and do that. And that's a whole shoot. You need a whole crew doing that. But it's not necessarily under the supervision of, the director or the main cinematographer. And so, that's just something I've sort of always paid a little bit more attention to. One show that is just a total random thing is like White Collar. I remember being this show that just has this tons of second unit photography of New York City that like most other New York shows just like don't. And here it would probably be a lot of like the desert shots.
Yeah, the second unit, they definitely keep busy doing pretty much anything that doesn't involve the main actors. And so, I mean, it could be like they could be getting shots of hands pushing buttons on a computer or, whatever. So they're kind of all over the map with the different types of things.
And with stuff like the on location, like the New Mexico crew, is that often a chance for kind of more local film people to sort of get discovered? Like the person who like they're doing work in a particular area. They're not running off to Hollywood to try and chase that career, but like they can work when the film comes to their area and do a good, and if they do a good job, can get noticed maybe, and then start to do more bigger budget. This isn't bigger budget, but like main crew kind of stuff. Is there some degree, like I don't want to think of it as the minor leagues. Like there's a lot of great movies that are made completely like way outside of Hollywood, but how does that aspect of it work?
Yeah, I mean, it is the local crew that they're hiring. And so those people are coming on board. So this team really was the people, the camera operators and stuff, not necessarily like, the director of photography. They're not hiring another director of photography for there. Harris is still coming here, but then he has another camera and he'll probably work with his very specific main camera crew. But you can see they're hiring a C camera operator and a first assistant. So a whole C camera team they're bringing on just for New Mexico. And so, yeah, it's people that they get to work with. And what's nice about it, especially like with New Mexico, which has great tax incentives, which brings a lot of these projects here, is all of these people start getting all sorts of work and all these other projects that keep coming to New Mexico. Then Harris can say, we had a great camera department there. You should get George Stevenson and Stuart Chip Bird and Ryan Eustace on because they were fantastic. And so they end up working on all these other big projects that kind of come through New Mexico. And so it's you're right. It is very much kind of a calling card, a way for these people to kind of continue growing their careers without having to move to Hollywood.
One other credit that I wanted to call out is at one point we see the extras supervisor. And I did not write it down. It kind of just actually I caught my eye this watch as we were watching right before we make it. And just I know there's some jobs that you often talk about in different kinds of production, and this is true in like everything from like, producing like events for like, nonprofits or stuff to like creating art or anything like that, where the best version of your job is if no one notices the work you did, and extras to me is exact. Paul, you and I have talked about this, and I think there's a James Bond movie you may be able to bring up. But like, I don't think there was anything that I saw in the extras that made me be like, wow, those extras were really well. But, we talked, Andy, you would often give the names of some of the extras we were seeing. And in every scene, I feel like, you think of scenes like when they're at the crater, and like all those extras, like they have to be reacting in a particular way to sell that scene. All the people in the town when the destroyer attacks, all the people in Asgard who react with shock to the, Loki and Thor, like their reaction's a part of what sells you on the moment but that you don't often notice. So just want to kind of give a shout out to that role. Yeah.
It's a lot of work finding all those people. Because, I mean, anyone who's been an extra, they know it can be a kind of a boring job. You come out there, you think it's going to be exciting, you're on a movie, and you sit around for like 9 hours, and then they have you come out to set for like a half hour, and they have you react a few times, and then you go sit down for a little while. And it can be pretty slow and tedious. And so a lot of people don't want to come back and do it. So, I think you're a good call calling them out, because I think they're doing some good work here.
For sure. I feel like extras is a spot where you don't usually add a lot of value, but you have a really big opportunity to completely blow it. As you mentioned in GoldenEye, there's this like casino scene and all the extras like, ooh, ah, and they're like, they just seem totally unbelievable to me. And it just took me out of the moment, and out of the movie. My wife was she was an extra in The Bourne Legacy with Jeremy Renner. And there's this scene, just like, and so she had multiple 14-hour days sitting around waiting. Okay, now go. And now you wait. and then you're supposed to run away. And like some of the people running away were like, and I don't know if it's the extras director or the main director, but they're like, okay, no jazz hands, like you have to just put your hands down, just run, like, because you don't, you need to make sure the extras are both looking natural, but also aren't doing something that's necessarily going to like draw the focus away from the principal action, right? So I think it's a very easy to overlook, and you want people to be able to overlook it. And if they can't, then you probably haven't done your job very well.
Because let's just talk about human nature. Like if I get 10 seconds on screen as one person in a 30-person group in a Marvel movie, every part of my brain is going to be telling me, make sure people notice you in this moment.
Right.
Which is exactly what the extra doesn't want to do. Exactly. But I imagine like 80% of extras like have to fight that urge. Mm-hmm. And so the director probably is a big part of like, just help, especially because like just making people feel appreciated, even if they're not going to be like, telling someone your job is not to be noticed is a hard thing to do. Yeah. So
but it's still a really important job. Like I think a lot of the stuff produced during the pandemic suffered from not having as many extras in a lot of scenes, right? A lot of places don't feel as lived in. They don't feel as natural because, sensibly, they didn't want as many people on set. That makes sense. So they were kind of writing and shooting away from scenes that had a lot of people. But, if you can make a world feel much more whole and real, I think, by having, people there. And that job is important, if not to be noticed.
Yeah. All right, well, coming to the end of our time together, that sounds much more ominous than I mean it, but at the end of the week, Andy or Paul, has there been any other last minute or last credit or name or any other thing you wanted to bring up?
No, I think we're good.
I'll just say the laborers, hail the laborers.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a cereal box joke.
Yes.
Kashi strawberry pillows.
You ate Kashi strawberry pillows in the 2000s, you know that joke. But yeah, but it's I'll be honest, talking to the two of you over the last couple of years has really changed my opinion on the credits. Like I used to be annoyed at Marvel that I had to sit through just these boring scroll of names to then watch interesting content. Again, old man back in the seats and, all the other stuff. But like, I feel, I love that we got to do this discussion and really talk about like all these people who are not appreciated, but, I've often heard like a director, one of the biggest things they do is they're directing a team, but then and so you can say like Branagh did a very good job of picking these specific people, but then they have to actually do the work that Branagh wants them to do. And yeah, it's just, I think it's really great to get to talk about just how important these roles are and who these people are and just get to look further into that.
And film is just such a collaborative medium. I can't think of anything that's more collaborative. Just the number of people that have to be involved and have to just do specifically what they need to do for the production to really make 2 hours or even, what was this, an hour 45 maybe, really come together. It's this minute 110. I should be able to do the math. But to like make this whole package just be kind of as tight and effective as it is, it just takes the work of so many people. And so I think just, taking a minute or 3 hours to appreciate, all the work that went in, it matters to me.
Awesome. Well, Paul, it's been so great having you on this week. Again, for those who wanted to follow you, just give a quick rundown of like where they can find like your books, your videos, the different stuff you're doing.
Yeah, so I have a website called ZenMadman.com, which hopefully will have stuff on it by the time this podcast airs. I also have a Twitter, ZenMadman, and I stream some on Twitch as ZenMadman.
Awesome. And what kind of stuff are they going to find on that website eventually?
Yeah, so I have some poker books that I wrote, Way of the Poker Warrior, and some other poker written content, some poker videos, some music that I recorded, and then also some stories that I wrote, one novelette called First, and a series of a book of flash fiction called ZenMadman's Flash Fiction Folio. And
I will do a bit of, this is 100% promoting you. It's not self-promotion at all, but you can also find Paul quite often on the Superhero Ethics podcast or I think I've heard of this, the Star Wars Universe podcast. The joke, I host both of them. Paul is a very frequent guest. He's been a co-host at various points in time. Find my stuff at theethicalpanda.com. You go to thenextreel.com, and you'll find a lot of other great film podcasts that Andy and other great people are a part of. And more than anything, have a nice day.
Till next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.